Thank you for tuning in to Going the Distance with Go Long. I'm Jill Consor Beck, founder of Go Long. Go Long is a coaching service for women over 40 to help them cut through the clutter and learn to become the best version of themselves. On each episode of Going the Distance with Go Long, I have a chat with an expert in a field that is very pertinent to my clients and Substack subscribers. And this episode is no different. I am here with Karen Covy, a divorce coach. And maybe you're not thinking about getting divorced or anything else, but I think that there's a lot of wisdom that Karen has in terms of what she's seen over the course of her career, which you're going to hear about, and how it may be able to apply to your life and your situation at this point in time. So, Karen, welcome to the show.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Jill.
Yeah. So, Karen, you've seen a few things, you've done a few things. Tell us how you got here.
Oh, it's a long story, but the long and winding road, as they say. So I started my career as a regular old lawyer, right? And I worked for a big firm. I worked for the government. I started my own firm after a while, and I said, I will take any kind of case there is, except divorce. And you know what they say, when you make plans, God or the universe or whatever you call the power that is, laughs. Well, he was laughing at me because I was in my office and client after client kept coming in saying, Karen, I need help with a divorce. Karen, do you know a good divorce attorney? Karen. And finally, I was sitting in my office. I threw up my hands. I said, okay, I'll do divorce. And I never looked back. But when I went there, because I had a decade of experience before I walked in divorce court, I walked in there and I went, well, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Like, it didn't make any sense to me, and I'm a lawyer, right? Because when you're ripping someone apart on cross-examination in a trial and they've done something terrible, like, that's one thing.
Right.
But when it's your spouse and you have to sit next to them at your kid's soccer game, there's no universe where that makes sense.
Right.
And so I kept looking for the better way. I immediately became a mediator. I became an arbitrator. I became a collaborative divorce professional. I kept looking for that better way. And one day I was in my office having a consult with a client. It was hot. The door was open. Client left. My secretary had been, her desk was outside, and she had overheard the conversation, and she said, no one else does that, right? And I said, does what? And she said, well, she had worked for all the big divorce firms in the city. And she said, no one else sits down and explains, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. Here's your options. Here's how it works, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, if they're not doing that, what are they doing? And she said, here's a contract, sign here. I said, well, I don't think that's right, because it's not my life. My job as a professional is to, I always believed, educate my clients and help them make the decision that's going to be best for them, but I don't get to make it for them. Well, not everybody thinks the same way. And that's kind of what opened me up to coaching and going down that path. And so I ultimately had to choose one or the other because it was too much to do both. And so I chose coaching because I figured I can't change the divorce system. It still doesn't make sense, but at least I can change the people that go into it. My clients will do better, and that's what I can do. That's what I do.
Yeah, I love that, because I think that, as coaches, right, you're trying to give people an understanding of the levers that they have at their disposal. And by you explaining, like, look, you could do it this way and this may make sense on paper, but this is not how it's going to play out in the system. And you could say, like, you're more of like sitting there problem solving with them, being like, you're not trying to say, like, tell me how you're going to get there. You're just like, look, tell me where you want to end up. And I can tell you the best way of getting there so that you can sit next to your former spouse at your kid's soccer game and not want to just like rip them to shreds or minimize that feeling.
100%. And what you said was so important, because you start with, where do you want to be when it's over? You don't start with, okay, I just want to do this, and dive in without a strategy, without a plan, without any idea of where you want to end up. Because in all 50 states in the United States, at the end of the day, if you want a divorce, you're going to be divorced. Your spouse can make it take longer, they can make it cost more, but they cannot stop you. So the right question to ask is not, can I get a divorce? It's, where am I going to be when the divorce is over? What do I want?
Yeah.
What do I want my life to look like? And then you start building that out right from the get-go.
So I had a couples therapist on previously, and she talked about, I said, I'm like, how do you know when it's not going to work out with couples therapy? Right? When, there's couples where you're like, okay, they can work through this. And then there's times where she's probably like, yeah, no. And she had her own rubric, around like the four horsemen.
Yep.
And one of the things she talked about was contempt, right? From your perspective, and you're talking to people and they're like, I'm not sure, what are you like trying to look for to kind of guide them? Because you're not necessarily being like, you need to get divorced, right? Like,
No, no.
so what are you looking for in terms of when people are talking to you and saying like, you know what, you should probably go to a couples counselor. Like, you'd be better served going in that direction before you come. If you still need me, I'll be here. So
Right.
maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah. There's a practical side, and then there's an emotional, psychological side as well. And you've got to be ready on all fronts. I mean, first of all, financially. There are times in your life or in your marriage where it doesn't make financial sense to get a divorce. If you've got two people and you've got enough money at the end of the month between both of you to barely pay the bills now, well,
Right.
when you add a divorce into that, it's going to really put a strain on your finances. And if you don't have any money in the bank, or you're not fully employed, or, blah, 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 or like in 2008, there were financial reasons why getting a divorce made no sense. People were upside down in their houses, their
Right.
401ks had just gotten hit. Like that's always number one. If you don't have enough money to survive, it's a problem.
I mean, you also have that too now, even now, where people are locked into their low interest rate.
Right.
So, I mean, there is a little bit of that going on right now.
Yeah, 100%. But that's a little bit different because you can be creative with that. That's
Okay.
an obstacle, but it's not a total roadblock.
Right.
If, on the other hand, if you look at your finances and you say, okay, if I get divorced, I can't eat, I can't
Right.
put a roof over my head, that's a different discussion, right?
Sure.
So you've got to look at the practical aspects, but you've also got to look at the intangibles, the emotional, the psychological, how do you feel about this? Have you tried everything that you need to try to be satisfied in your own heart that this is the right decision for you, right? Not for anybody else. Doesn't matter what anybody else says. The peanut gallery does not get a vote. It's, can you do this? Do you feel comfortable doing this? And I've had clients that have come to me and said, I've tried 4 different couples counselors. We're done. Like, stick a fork in me. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. On the other hand, I've had couples who thought they were done, but then something changed, something shifted. Somebody was open to going to counseling who wasn't before. Great. By all means, if there's a way you can save your marriage, like, do that every
Right.
single time. But it's when either you've gotten past the point where you want to do that, and that's a real thing. The point of no return is a real thing. Or you've tried everything and none of it worked, and you just don't think you don't have it in you to do it anymore. Okay, now we got to look at other options.
I remember there was friends of ours who were going through a very we'll say intense breakup. The thing that I said is that if there is no path where you are going to be able to put this situation that they were going through like behind you,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't like a judgment, it's like, look, if they were always going to be on, say, lower ground than you in terms of the relationship because they're always trying to like make up for what happened, whatever the schism was in the relationship, right? Then I don't think that's healthy, right? Like, that was like the thing where I said to them, like, they're always trying to make up for something. Like 20 years later, if you're still together, are you still going to be making that person make up for something? Like, that doesn't seem to be like a good, healthy relationship.
Here's the challenge is that everybody in a relationship, whether it's a marriage or a long-term partnership or anything, they're trying to make the other person make up. They're
Right.
trying to change the other person. That doesn't work. It's
Right.
about you. Are you willing to let go? Are you
Hmm.
willing to forgive? Are you willing to clean up your side of the relationship so that
Sure.
it can be healthy and moving forward? Because you're the only one you can control. And if you're just going to hold something over someone else's head, so
Yeah.
you're, it's like they'll never be able to make it up to you. That's a really lousy way to live in a relationship.
That's what I said. I said, I'm like, it might feel good right now, but I don't think that's something that's sustainable. And I mean, granted, I'm not a marriage counselor, I'm not an attorney. And oh, by the way, none of this constitutes legal advice. You need to talk to your own attorney. This is not attorney client privileged, anything, any of that nature. So let's throw that out there. But I think that one of the things when you see, because you've been obviously dealing with all sorts of couples at all different stages of life, what is it if someone is contemplating, like, I don't know if I want to pull the cord on the big D,
Hmm.
right? The big D word. What is it? What is like a rubric, maybe, or a checklist that you could possibly like say to people in terms of like, if you're feeling like this, if you're finding that this is something, this is always a thing, like, is there anything that you can give advice on that in terms of like a basic rubric to be like, you should go talk to someone?
Well, it's hard. There are certain things, and again, this decision is always values based. What are your
Right.
values? And so my opinions are infused with my own values. Like, number one, if you or your kids are in danger, you're done. You're out. You just
Right.
leave. Like,
Right.
nothing else matters more than your physical safety. So if you're in a domestic violence situation, you need to end that relationship. And you need to get the help to end it that will get you to that place, right?
Right.
So most people who are in that situation, they need support. They need somewhere to go. They need some money. They need blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So that's what I would say. If you are not in that situation, then you've got to look at, you ask yourself questions. For example, what do I want out of my life? What is this? What does my spouse want? Are we on the same page? Right? I've seen a lot of couples who get to a certain stage in life, the kids are grown and gone, and all of a sudden they're looking at each other and they're saying, I don't know who you are anymore. Or one person says, hey, I don't have to work as hard anymore. I want to go explore the world. I want to go on big vacations. I want to, go every weekend somewhere. I want to go. And the other person is saying, I'm happy at home with the television or a book, right?
Right.
I don't want to do that. Okay. Now you've got something, you look at what do you want for your life? And is this person who you are married to likely to get you what you want? And if the answer is no, are you willing to give up what you want? Because that's a choice as well. But
Right.
it's the rubric is, I have a whole system that I take people through, which is a bunch of steps, but fundamentally it's, do you want the same things? Are you on the same page? Can you make this work? If you two are living like roommates and there's no connection anymore, are you willing, first of all, to put in the time and the effort to rebuild?
Right.
Or are you too far gone and you have no interest in that? And oh, by the way, I know there are people out there who say that one spouse wanting to change is enough. That if the other one, they don't want to go to counseling, they don't want to work on the marriage, they don't, that the one person is all you need and you can turn everything around. I don't happen to subscribe to that theory, right? I think it takes two people wanting to work on it in order to repair the marriage.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that essentially. Like the bullshit button came out because it was literally like you're in a two-person relationship, it takes both people. And even if, like, say something is like blatantly the fault of my husband, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's still a role that I played in it. And it's rare that you're going to find a situation where you didn't play a role. Now, even if like someone cheats on the other person, that doesn't mean you're like forgiving that person and that's not grounds to leave. Then it becomes, as you say, values based. But the thing is that you can then make the decision if you're the person who was cheated on that you're like, you know what? I'm not doing this, right? Like I've crossed that bridge. That's it. And I'm good. But you're not going to fix it by one person going to counseling and the other person not. And a lot of times I have lots of friends who have gone to individual therapy in addition to couples therapy to try, and because they're working on their own shit with their individual therapist, and then they're trying to process, how do I incorporate whatever new discoveries I have about myself into the relationship, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And let me be clear. If you change yourself, like you're in individual therapy, you're working on your own stuff, you're changing, that will change the relationship because the dynamic has changed. You're different. So your spouse has got to change in one way or the other or not, but the dynamic changes. The energy in between the two of you changes. But what I'm talking about is if you've got one person who doesn't want to work on it and doesn't want to change, then your only choice is, do I want to live with them how they are, understanding they're not going to change, or am I not okay with that?
Yeah, totally. Because I've seen situations where, like, say a spouse cheats on someone and they're like, I'm done. I'm not going to therapy because you violated something, in terms of our values in our relationship. And it's like, okay, you know what? Like, they're not trying to sit there and be like, okay, we're going to work it out, but not really work it out type of thing. Going back to that whole, like, the person has to earn their way back in. They just made a decision like, you know what?
Done.
I'm done. Right. But I've definitely seen lots of situations where, and this is being very stereotypical, where the guy doesn't want to go to therapy. Right. And the woman is like, let's go to couples therapy. And the guy is like, no, I don't want to go to couples therapy. And then it's like, all right, well, then you have to decide what that's going to mean for you and how you want to live, because things aren't going to magically change if you're the only one going to therapy.
Right. And especially in the case of cheating, can couples come back after cheating? If you're not that person who says, okay, I'm done, and you're like, okay, maybe we can still work through this, 100% you can. But to try to do it by yourselves without professional help, good luck. I mean, that rarely works because there's just too much emotion. It's too raw. You can't hear each other. You can't deal with it. But a good couples therapist or a marriage coach, or like, couples therapy isn't the only thing. There's a lot of different options. But if you fundamentally have a person who says, nope, not doing any of that, well, like, that's magical thinking to think something is going to change. You have to do something.
Yeah. So when you're sitting there and you're dealing with a couple, now, do you sometimes work with the couple or do you work with one person in the couple?
Most of the time I work with one person. Sometimes I will mediate for a couple, but usually it's a mediate coach. But usually it's one person.
Usually it's one person. Okay. So when you're dealing with someone, when they're like trying to work it out, like they're sitting there and they're like, all right, I'm hiring you, but we're also trying to work it out, right? Does that happen in your practice?
Yeah, sometimes people do that and they say, look, I need to know if it doesn't work out, what am I looking at?
Right. So what are some of the other things that you're like sitting there and like the red flag is going off where you're like, okay, this is another sign where things aren't going to end well?
If one person in the relationship is not willing to take responsibility for their stuff and the role that they're playing, that's a red flag.
Right. That's so fundamental.
Yeah. I mean, if all you've got, if one person is saying, okay, I'm not perfect, I screwed this up or that up, and I'm willing to take responsibility for that, but you've got to take responsibility for your side, and the spouse says, well, I don't have a side, it's all your fault, it's all your problem, right? Okay, that's extraordinarily hard to work with.
Yeah, sure. So, okay, so let's say you're on the path, you're pulling the D cord, right? And you're moving forward. What are some of the things that people should be thinking about before they officially announce that they're pulling the D cord to their partner?
This is a great question because too many people just blurt it out without understanding how to be prepared before you get to that point. Because the minute you say that word, divorce, everything changes. The dynamic changes, the relationship changes, and oftentimes information that you could have easily walked over to the file cabinet or the computer and gotten yesterday
Yeah.
disappears.
Yep.
So you need to have all of your financial paperwork prepared, ready, stored somewhere in the cloud or off premises, or, and I'm not saying hide it, but just have a copy of it,
Yeah.
because if your spouse wants to hide financial information after they know that you're getting a divorce, it become, can you get it through the legal system? Yes, but it's so much harder and more expensive. Why do that? Get it now. Make sure all of that is put together now. So that's one of the big things that you want to have ready on the front end. You also want to be prepared for, how do you have this conversation? The conversation with your spouse, and if your kids are young, the conversation with your kids. What is the best way to break the news,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it is breaking the news.
Because if you do that part badly, you start everything off on the wrong foot. And you don't want your spouse getting their undies in a bunch and going and lawyering up right out of the gate. And now you created a problem that you didn't want to have, right? I mean, you can't stop your spouse from lawyering up and hiring a shark if they want to, but if you do things in the right way, you make it less likely that they're going to think that's their only option.
Right. So you're getting your finances in order. Maybe there's legal documentation you're getting in order as well, in terms of what does your current estate planning look like, all of those things. And if you've done that, which I hope most people do that, because a lot of people don't do it who need to do it. When would someone say hire someone like yourself versus like going straight to the lawyer, or maybe they're like, okay, maybe I go to the mediator? What's the thought process between engaging with a lawyer, which could be very expensive,
Mm-hmm.
versus like deciding like, hey, maybe we could figure this out in a more cost-effective way and do it through mediation?
Right. In a perfect world, they're hiring me first before they go to the lawyer and before they go to the mediator,
Right.
because they don't know how to prepare to go to the mediator or the lawyer. They don't people think they know what mediation is. Oh, yeah, somebody helps us work things out. Yeah, kind of. But there are all different kinds of mediations. There are different mediators. There are if you walk in the door to a mediation, which is essentially a negotiation of how you're going to divide things up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Including time with your kids and money and all the things you care most about in your life. And if you
Mm-hmm.
don't know what you're doing when you walk in the door, how can you expect to do it well?
Yeah.
You're not going to end up with what you want. So working with a coach or somebody who can help you get prepared and make that plan out of the gate, that's going to be helpful. And the same thing is true with their lawyer. I help people save a ton of money with lawyers because I help them find the right ones, know how to find the right lawyer, and then work with them in a way where they're not getting billed $1 million an hour to do stuff that the lawyer doesn't need to be doing. In my humble opinion, you need a team to get through a divorce. Just like it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a team to get through a divorce. And if you use each divorce professional or each professional who's on your team in the right way, you optimize your resources, you pay the least amount of money in fees to every person, and you do this more efficiently. If you just run to the lawyer's office, the lawyer is not going to tell you, when you're crying to them about the fight you just had last night with your spouse, they're not necessarily going to say, go get a therapist. They're going to sit there and bill you $900 an hour to listen.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like it's like from a tax perspective, you'd be better off going to your accountant and saying like, this is what's happening, as opposed to going to the big law firm you just hired, then they contract it out. So you're paying their time plus their accountant's time, and that's going to be inflated, as opposed to being like, you know what, I'm going to find an accountant who, most people just need a regular CPA to do it. Some people have complicated, holdings and everything else, and you might need someone,
Right.
more specialized, but that's still, I have to think, going to be cheaper.
Not only that, but you're working with the person who you know and you chose and you've got a relationship with.
Right.
That is always going to be better for you, the client, I believe, than, like you said, having the lawyer. And by the way, lawyers often don't contract it out. They just do it, right?
Hmm.
Now, if your lawyer also happens to be a CPA, cool, great. You got somebody
Right.
who's qualified. But if they're not,
Right.
um, then and they're going to the CPA and getting what they'll do is they'll go and they'll have an hour conference with the CPA and then they'll interpret and they'll tell you what the CPA told them and it's not efficient or effective. So you want to,
Right.
that's why the whole team approach, in my humble opinion, is always going to be the best. And then, who do you need on your team? Who you need, Jill, might be different than who I would need.
Right.
It depends on your circumstances and situation. So that's why having a coach there to help you decide, what do I need? What
Hmm.
kind of specialist do I need? And who within that specialty, like what kind of an accountant, what kind of a lawyer, and you may need different lawyers besides just a divorce lawyer. To your point, most divorce lawyers don't also do estate plans. I mean, they do in small towns, but if you got a big city
Right.
lawyer, they're going to have a different person who's doing different kinds of law. The divorce lawyer isn't necessarily a business lawyer. Maybe you've got a business interest and you've got to have a different lawyer on your team to deal with all of that. So it's all about putting the right people in place. So when you've got the right people doing the right thing, that ends up getting you to where you want to be in the most efficient way that you can possibly do it.
So I've had a lot of friends, a lot of post 40, post 50-year-old divorces, particularly post 50-year-old divorces. Is that something you're seeing more of as like people are living longer and with COVID? And I don't know if the COVID thing is just a timing thing and the post 50 thing. I don't know if there's been enough studies on it, but the reality is that anecdotally, I'm seeing a lot of post 50 divorces since COVID.
The studies have been shown, and this was even pre-COVID, that the divorce rate, everybody always, they talk about how the divorce rate is climbing and it's well over 50% and it's blah, blah, blah. Not true. The divorce rate has actually been declining in most demographics since the 80s, except for those people who are over 50. People who are over 50, the divorce rate has doubled. People over 60, it's tripled.
Wow. And I mean, people are living longer now and they're living better quality lives also. And I think that has something to do with it as well. Like now, someone passes away before 80, and especially if they weren't like sick with something, you're just like, oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
And I remember when I was younger, I was in court representing, it was actually a friend of mine's parents wanted to get divorced. They were in their 80s.
oh, wow.
And yeah, and at that time, that was so unusual. And I remember they both wanted the divorce. They both signed off on all the paperwork. Everything was done. And I was standing in front of the judge, and the judge is looking down and arguing with them and arguing with me, going, "You're 80 years old. Do you really want to do this? Right? Can't you go work it out? What if you go to," and I'm looking, going, with all due respect, Your Honor, that's not your job.
Yeah.
Now people don't blink. They don't bat an eye, because it happens more and more, even among 80-year-olds.
So, one of the things, and we talked about this earlier in the call, that I always talk about with people is levers. And it's really important to understand which levers you have at your disposal. Now, you're probably dealing with clients who have like a whole litany of things that they want in the divorce, whether it's custody, whether it's the house, whether it's certain assets, whether it's certain types of support. And I mean, obviously, I am just scratching the surface. So let's say conservatively, there's 20 things that they want, and it's probably a lot more than that, but let's just say it's 20. How do you work with a client to help them prioritize things so that they can get the most for their money?
That's a great question, because, first I sit down with them and we do a little reality check. Like, okay, you're not going to get everything you want. I mean, you're
Right.
just not. Nobody ever does. So with that in mind, you're going to take that list of 20 or 40 or however many things it is, and you're going to take 3 pieces of paper. On one, you're going to say, I want this. The next one, you're going to say, I need this. The next one, you're going to say, I'd like it, but I could live without it, right? And you're going to take that list of 20 things and you're going to parcel them out to which page that they should be on, right? Is it a nice to have, a need to have, or a want to have? And then you're going to throw away the other two lists, and you're going to take, I need this. And you pick one thing. Then you start to prioritize, what do I need? And if you have kids, you get a top two needs, one related to kids and one related to money. And then everything else, I mean, what you're doing is you're figuring out what your values are and what do you need the most. Like, if you need X amount of dollars per month to live on, then making sure you get that in whatever way you get that is a need to have, right? Grandma's couch is fine. Like, that'd be great to have it in your living room, but you can live without grandma's couch. You can't live without the living room.
I can live without the plastic cover on my grandmother's couch.
Why did they all have, anyways, that's
Anyway, that's a story for another episode.
Every grandma had those.
Yeah.
But it's about figuring out what do you need and then making that your North Star. And that becomes your negotiating strategy as well. It's like, I need to have this and this. And if you're smart, you can do the same exercise with your spouse in mind. So you're saying, what is it that's going to be their number 1 and 2 priority? Like, if you can get the top 2 or 3, awesome, that's great. But you know what you absolutely have to have. And you also know what the throwaways are. And if you know what their throwaways are, what you're looking for is that overlap, right?
Right.
Some things that they absolutely need to have, you might not care about. Great. You can negotiate that away and say, I'll give you that. I don't care. You can have that, but I want this, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you start. So knowing what's on your list and what's on their list, likely on their list, you don't know 100% for sure, but you've probably got a good idea. That gives you a way to start saying, where is my leverage? Where's the lever that I can pull that I can, you're looking in a perfect world for the win-win. What can I give them that makes them feel like they won, but I get what I need so I feel like I won too?
In a lot of these divorces of my friends, they have to be more women. And I can't even tell you the high percentage of them that said, I paid him to go away. Because these were women who worked in tech. They worked for certain companies where there was a lot of stock appreciation over their tenure there. And they're like, I paid for him to go away. And it was like, you're just sitting there and you're like, fuck, that has to like completely suck. What advice do you have for someone who may be in that position where they're like, it might just be easier to pay him to go away so that I could just get on with my life?
What's the price of freedom? There's a law firm in town, and they will remain nameless. However,
Yes.
their acronym is WFC. Write the fucking check.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, if you really want to be divorced and you want your freedom and you want your life back, then like, money is fungible. You can always make more. You can always, and you'd say maybe you can't. Maybe you got the tech company buyout. You've got the stock. Like, you're not going to be in that position again. Great. Well, you have to decide what is more important to you, having that money or having your life back. And understand that it's not a moral judgment in the way most people take it. There are people who are staying married because they don't want to split the money, and they know that. And if you're okay with that, God bless. There's nothing wrong with the choice. Just understand that's the choice you're making. You are not a victim. This is not poor you. If you choose to be miserable the rest of your life in, saying, oh, he's, or she's doing this, whatever, you're not a victim. You're making a choice, and it's a fine choice, but it's a choice.
Well, yeah, because what you're saying also is that, like, if you're paying someone to go away, it's like, you know what, my mental health is better if I have to work an extra couple of years versus having this person. And oh, by the way, when you're in court, you may not get to keep all that money that you think, depending obviously on what state you're in and everything else. There's all these variables that you're still rolling the dice in terms of if you're going to be able to keep all the money that you think you're entitled to.
Right. And you never know. And if you go all the way to trial, I got to tell you, judges do wacky things. They do things you would never in a million years expect. So just thinking, well, the judge will side with me, I'm right, not necessarily true.
So let's talk about revisiting a divorce agreement, say 3 or 4 years after the fact, right? Couples settled, they signed their divorce agreement, whatever. Not super amicable, but like not like War of the Roses
Okay.
either. But the thing is that so then one of the spouses decides that they're going to move within the metro area. Now, depending on within the metro area, that could be a significant, even though it might be 20 miles. 20 miles could be a long, distance in terms of schools and everything else. How does one go to, like, whether it's a coach or a lawyer, right, to kind of reopen the agreement? Because this is going to impact the day-to-day lives of their kids. Like, So, in Seattle, 20 miles is like an eternity away. As an example, New York City, 20 miles is like an eternity away.
Right.
So
it depends on the law of the state that you're in. For example, in Illinois, if you're in the Chicago metro area, the
right, yeah,
the surrounding counties, you get 25 miles.
right.
And then it's considered a relocation with the child, and you've got to meet certain legal criteria, and you have to petition the court, and you have to do. But if it's under that, you can move, but it's going to cause a complete rejiggering of your schedule because
it's a complete disruption.
Yeah, you're going to have, and you have to know that that's what you're in for. And I have seen cases where it completely blows up a co-parenting relationship that was kind of sort of okay, maybe not, you weren't besties, but you could manage.
Yeah.
And then one person moves 24 miles away and all hell breaks loose.
So
right?
What advice do you have for someone who's like dealing with that? Because I'm sure a lot of times, like, life changes, circumstances change, people change jobs, like, regardless of the motive, right? There are sometimes some reasonable reasons why people need to relocate within that 24-mile period, but it still causes inconvenience to the other spouse.
Yeah, it's about, first of all, having a conversation. Whether the first conversation you need to have is a lawyer in your jurisdiction that says,
right,
what are the rules? Can you do this without court permission or your spouse's agreement? Yes or no, right? And so you know what you're dealing with. And then once you know that, it's about having a conversation with your spouse. Hopefully you're on good enough terms that you can do that. But you at least try to do that. You explain what the situation is. Maybe you've got a promotion opportunity in a different state that's going to, like, dramatically improve your standard of living, your kids' opportunities, your yada, yada, yada. You still have to have the conversation with your spouse and find out, are they on board? Yes or no. And if they're on board, cool, fine. You can work something out. You can change the parenting time schedule. There's a lot of creative things that you can do. If they're not on board, then the only way that you can move with the kids is to petition the court. This is, in my humble opinion, the most difficult case there is in any of the court systems when it comes to divorce, because especially when you have two good parents. So you got two parents who are good. They both have a relationship with their kids. Everything is working. Then one parent, for a legitimate reason, needs to move or wants to move out of state, and they've got to make a decision. And fundamentally, I've also seen cases where they go to court, they petition the judge. And by the way, this is not a cheap fight. This is super expensive. It puts your kids through hell. It puts you through hell. You get to the end of the case. If you go all the way to trial, the judge will make a decision. One person, either you get to leave with the kids or you don't, right?
Yeah.
And then I've seen the person who, and it can go both ways. Like, I've seen somebody say, some courts say, yes, you can move with the kids. And then the other spouse has the decision. Do I stay where I'm at, or do I move to be with my kids now? Or reverse, where the judge says, you know what? You can move if you want to, but you're not taking those kids.
What happens when it's not an out of state, out of jurisdiction thing? It's within that 20-mile jurisdiction thing, but it's going to cause like a lot of chaos.
You got to know who you're dealing with. It depends on the
Right,
quality of your relationship going forward. If you've got a decent relationship with your ex, then you
right.
sit down, you want to have the conversation in a neutral place. You want to have things worked out. You want to be sensitive to their feelings and their
Hmm.
concerns and your kids and say, look, here's the situation. In a perfect world, it's a discussion, not a decision. Like you're
Right.
saying to them, I have this opportunity to move. I would like to do that. What do you think? Can we work something out? And you can give them ideas of how a different split in parenting time could look
Yeah.
like, like because like for instance, if you're living that 20 miles away and it takes an hour to get
Hmm.
there, then clearly if somebody has, 2 hours of time with a kid for dinner one night, that's not practical anymore,
Right.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Totally.
how can you rejigger the schedule to give people to make sure that everybody has enough time to have a relationship with their children so that your kids aren't spending their entire childhood in the back seat of a car?
Right.
What can you do? Is there a way that you can talk about it, that you can work it out? And ultimately, both of you probably have hard choices to make.
Right. I've seen this happen to a few of my friends where they have to revisit, the parenting agreement. And, the other thing that I find is that once a kid reaches 12, I don't care what's in the custody agreement, they make a decision on who they want to stay with.
That's interesting. It's hard because legally
Right.
it's the parent who is supposed to make them.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it starts as early as 12, but definitely when they're teenagers, right? Good luck
Yeah,
trying to
like I said, mine
anything.
it's anecdotal, but I find at the age of 12 of like my cousin's kids, like my parent, not my parents' kids, my friends who are parents, like that is the age when they make a decision around like, yeah, who, you could try and make me go, but
And some parents do make them go. There was a
yeah,
very famous case around the Chicago area. It was in DuPage County. It was years ago where I can't remember which parent had the custody, but let's say
mhm,
it was mom that had the custody and the kids didn't want to go see dad. Okay,
right.
we'll be stereotypical. And the mom forced them to go for a certain period of time and then said, I, I, I just can't force them to go anymore. And the dad was like, no, you shall come see me, right? So
Mhm,
the dad files a petition in court, which was his right to do.
sure.
And he says, mom is alienating these kids from me. That's why they don't want to come. And I don't, that may or may not have been true, but the judge was like at his wit's end and did a really stupid thing, which lasted for like a minute. But he was like, okay, and he couldn't figure it. So he put the kids in the lockup in the courthouse until they just would agree to go. Yeah, that didn't go well. It hit the papers the
Wow.
next day, and that was the only judge that ever did that.
Did that judge keep their job?
Yeah, I think they did with serious admonishment and never did it again. But it was frustration. I mean, if you look from the point of the judge, it's like, look, the kids are entitled to have a relationship with both parents. He's right, but she's right, but what do I do? And that didn't go well.
Wow. Okay.
But that's as a parent, that's
Yeah.
essentially what you're asking a court to do. It's like, I want you, what are you going to do? Throw mom in jail
Right.
until the kids go? And then you've got two teenagers sitting with their arms crossed in your living room, staring hate stares at
Yeah.
you, not talking
Yeah.
because you did something that they didn't like and you're forcing them to do something. If you want a relationship with your kids, that is not the way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. I forgot to ask you one question when we were talking about mediation. What is the difference between, say, going to like a trial versus going to arbitration versus going to mediation?
That's a whole conversation. So let's start with trial. You and your spouse cannot agree on how you want to divide things. You go to trial and the judge makes the decision for you. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Arbitration is similar to trial in that you and your spouse can't agree. You pick an arbitrator, or your lawyers pick an arbitrator for the most part, and you give the arbitrator, you infuse the arbitrator with similar authority as the judge, and the arbitrator decides. And whatever the arbitrator decides, you live with, right?
Right.
There may be a right of appeal to the judge, but probably not. Anyways, it's a whole different deal. So an arbitration, think of it as a private trial with an arbitrator.
Is that cheaper than a trial?
Yes. Typically, yes.
Okay.
And the reason that most people will choose that over a trial isn't necessarily just the cost factor, but it's the privacy factor.
Right. Yeah. You don't want like your kids' personal information.
Or celebrities will do that. People with a lot of money will do that because they don't want their dirty laundry in the public record, right?
Right.
That's arbitration. Mediation, the mediator is not going to decide anything. They don't have that power. Their job is to facilitate a conversation between you and your spouse and hopefully find common ground that you two can agree on. If you and your spouse don't agree on what you want to do in mediation, then the mediation, air quotes, failed, and you're back into the court system to let somebody else decide it. So in mediation, you make your own agreement, which is always going to be better than letting anybody else make it for you, because even if you get a private judge or a private arbitrator, they don't know you. They don't know your kids. They've got an obligation to be neutral, so it's not like you can appoint your best friend as the arbitrator,
well,
right?
Yeah, and they have to follow the law. Like, they're going to be following the letter of the law, except for maybe this judge that you just referred to. But theoretically, they are going to be following the letter of the law, whereas a mediator is going to allow for nuances of, like, say, with your kids and certain behavioral aspects.
Way more creative in mediation than you ever could at trial. If you go to a judge and you go all the way through trial, you are going to get a decision that follows the law and is fairly cookie cutter, right? They're not going to do all this wild, wacky, creative stuff. That's not their job. Their job is to make a decision. Same thing with an arbitrator. They're not going to try to be creative. They're going to say, okay, you asked me to decide. Here's what I decide. But in mediation, when you're making the agreement, you can start to say, okay, well, we can do things this way. We can, instead of having, a set parenting schedule, like, for example, I'm just going to throw out for firefighters or police officers or people who don't work a 9-to-5 job, doctors, right? They often get their schedule in the beginning of the month and it shows what their schedule is like for the rest of the month, but it changes month over month. Well, how do you decide what a parenting schedule is going to look like? Well, in mediation, the two of you might say, okay, the first of the month when they get their schedule and they know what days they have available for the kids, we'll make the monthly schedule once every month and we'll do it like that. Well, you can do that in mediation. Getting a judge to do that is going to be really hard because the judge is going to want more certainty and more depth because they don't want you coming back and fighting again.
Right, right. Well, Karen, we can go on and on. This has been such a great conversation, really informative for people who have to pull the ripcord or are considering pulling the ripcord, so that this way, they're educated and informed. So do you work with people outside of Illinois?
I work with people all over the world, actually, because I start working with people in that beginning space when they're trying to figure out, do I stay or do I go? That's a universal problem, right? It doesn't matter where you live. You're going to be dealing with the same kinds of issues and emotions. And then within people who are actually going through the divorce process, I work with people in every state.
Okay. I wanted to clarify that before we get into how people can contact you and everything else if they wanted to work with you. So how can people contact you if they wanted to get in touch? And by the way, Karen's blog, I'm on the mailing list just because it's helpful for me to help my clients, right, is really informative. So if this is something you're thinking about, I'm just going to plug her mailing list because it has a lot of very practical situations. So where can people find you?
The easiest place to find me is on my website. It's Karen Covy, C-O-V-Y. There's no E. So KarenCovy.com. I'm on all the socials at Karen Covy. I have a podcast called Off the Fence, Mastering Decision-Making, Divorce, and More. I've got, as you mentioned, I've got a blog. I've got a YouTube channel. I've got all the things. So you can find me everywhere. The best place to reach out is on my website, If you go to my website, there is a free divorce readiness quiz. There's an amicable divorce toolkit. You sign up for anything, you get on my mailing list until you want to unsubscribe, and then you hit unsubscribe.
Well, this has been lots of information that I hope is helpful for people if they're trying to navigate this kind of transition. And I actually think there's information there if, like, let's say you've been recently widowed or anything else in terms of like things that, that you may want to do in terms of getting things in order. I think there's some transferable steps that you could be doing. So not just even divorce, but, that kind of life change as well. All right. Well, Karen, thank you for being a guest on Going the Distance with Go Long, and I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in. If you want to be able to ask questions of our guests on this show, you could sign up to be a client of mine on the Go Long website, golong.me. Going the Distance is edited by John Richardson and produced by Go Long. If you really enjoyed this show, you can compliment Karen, our guest, and John, who has edited this show. If there has been a problem with this show and it didn't meet what you were looking for, you should please contact me. You could find this show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Please be sure to subscribe and like. We always appreciate all the ratings, reviews, and comments. Thanks again to Karen Covy. I'm Jill Consor Beck, and remember, it's your life. Go the distance. Go long.